Hello everyone, this is Latha Akula. In this video we are going to study about the new chapter in NCERT NEET Biology class 11, that is the cell cycle and cell division. Already we have completed this chapter for class 9 students. We have studied in briefly, but now we'll study the detailed account of this cell cycle and cell division. We see the cell, what will happen? The cell will grow and reproduce. So, the property of the cell is it can grow and reproduce. And any living organism, it starts its life, it may be a unicellular organism or a multicellular organism. It starts its life with a single cell. For example, we take the zygote. The zygote is developed from the single cell, and then that zygote undergoes division, cell division, and it forms the body of a living organism. And here, what is meant by cell division? The cell division is nothing but a process of division of a single cell or a pre-existing cell. The single cell or a pre-existing cell, it divides into two daughter cells, and these two daughter cells were identical to each other, and not only that, they were identical to their mother cell also. The pre-existing cell or the starting cell, we call it as a mother cell, and the resulting cells of the cell division are called as daughter cells. And these two daughter cells, they were identical to each other. They were identical to each other and they were identical to their mother cell also. And later, these daughter cells again grows its size, and when they attain maturity, they will also undergo cell division and develop some new daughter cells. Like this, it is a continuous process. It will continuous for several times. And here, from the single cell, the millions of cells are formed. Here, from one cell, two cells are formed. From two cells, four cells are formed. From the four, it will go on double, right? Here, finally, what will happen? The millions of cells are formed, which lead to the formation of the body, which lead to the formation of a body of a living organisms. And if we see, from one cell to daughter cells are formed. So, before division, any cell that undergoes several changes, in that cell, there are several sequential steps takes place. Before division of a cell into two daughter cells, before dividing, the cell undergoes several changes. So, what are the changes that takes place? It makes the copy of its genome. What is meant by genome? The genome is nothing but genetic material, that is the DNA. So, the mother cell, whatever the constituents it is having, it may be a genetic material or cell organelles or proteins, or several materials are present in the cytoplasm of the cell, right? All those constituents will be duplicated. That means that another copy of those components will take place. That is a duplication of the DNA or genetic material, and the duplication of the cell organelles, and there may be the synthesis of various proteins, and all those takes place. And later, only after the formation of all those components, that cell divides into two daughter cells. And here, the cell cycle. What is meant by cell cycle? Now only we have studied. There may be a sequence of events occurred in a cell. What are the sequence of steps? The cell duplicates its genome, synthesizes various constituents of the cell, like cell organelles, proteins and all, and eventually that divide into two daughter cells. The total process we call it as a cell cycle. What is meant by cell cycle? There are several sequence of steps takes place in the cell before division. There are duplication of the genome, duplication of the cell organelles, and finally the cell divides into two daughter cells. This total process we call it as a cell cycle. So what are the steps takes place? Synthesis of DNA takes place. There may be a duplication of the cell organelles takes place, and there may be various proteins required during the cell division will also be prepared, ready-made prepared in the cell. Before division only, the proteins required for the cell division were all prepared in the cell. And here, after the synthesis of DNA duplicate and after the duplication of the cell organelles only, the cell will divide. That means whatever the components having that will be duplicated, those duplicated components will be equally shared to the two daughter cells. Unless what happens, it cannot equally share its constituents to the daughter cells. And here, if you see the cell, the growth of the cell is a continuous process, but the duplication of the DNA and duplication of cell organelles that occurs only at specific stages of the cell only. And here, this cell cycle, it has two phases. How many phases are present in the cell cycle? There are two phases in the cell cycle. One is interphase and second one is M phase or mitotic phase or division phase. What is meant by interphase? Here, the phase between two successive M phases. M phase means what what we are calling it as M phase, division phase also. From one division to another division, there may be a phase is present, right? That phase is called as interphase. That means the phase between two successive division phases or two successive M phases is called as interphase. Here, what happens in the interphase? The cell prepares for cell division. What is the next phase? Division phase only, right? Further division, prior to division, the cell was making itself ready for the division. That means it was preparing the cell organelles, copy of the cell, another copy of cell organelles. It was preparing another copy of genome, and all the proteins and all required for the cell division were prepared in the interphase only, right? If we take for total cell cycle, if it is 100%, it is taking the duration. In that, more than 95% of the duration was taken by this interphase only, and less than 5% of the duration was occupied by this M phase. That means the maximum time period was taken by this interphase in total cell cycle. The 95% of the duration was occupied by this interphase, and the least 5% phase is taken by this duration was taken by this M phase. Because this interphase is a biosynthetic phase, all the components it need to make ready. For that, it was taking the much time for the cell division. And M phase means what? M phase is the actual cell division phase. Here in this phase only the cell division occurs. So in which phase the actual cell division occurs? In the interphase or M phase? We need to tell it as a M phase. In the M phase only the actual division of the cell occurs. And here the cell cycle varies from the cell to cell, from the organism to organism. For example, if we take the yeast cell, yeast cell it takes nearly 90 minutes time for its division. That means yeast cells they divide once in every 90 minutes. E. coli or Escherichia coli. Escherichia coli is a bacteria. It is a common bacteria present in our intestine. This bacteria it will divide once in every 16 minutes. And human cells for its division it takes 24 hours time. For the division of the human cells it takes 24 hours time, and the liver cells they take the maximum time they divide once in every for the division of those liver cells, for the replacement of the liver cells they will take more than a year, 1 year. And fruit fly embryos they divide once in every 8 minutes time. So these are the several durations. Here this is about the two phases of the cell cycle. In the next video we are going to study about interphase in detail.